Liz. I am Madam Crystal Butterfly, and today, my lovelies, I have a very intriguing story to share with you called A Deal with the Elf King by Elise Kova. But before we dive deeper into why someone needs to make a deal with a royal elf, let's take a look at the author. From a young age, Elise's parents would read to her, leading her to develop a love of reading, which eventually evolved into her telling her own stories. She wrote several stories when she was in elementary school, helping her develop her storytelling skills. In junior high, Elise abandoned any ambitions of becoming an author, preferring to focus on other interests she had at the time. Sometime later, when she was living in Japan, one of her friends got her to reawaken her love of writing. She started writing on forums for fun, and 5 books later, Elise discovered her stories were being read by a few thousand readers. This inspired her to start editing her books to get them published. After several failed attempts to get her story published the traditional way, Elise decided to self-publish. She now has several successful stories and encourages all aspiring authors not to give up. If you have a story to tell, put pen to paper and start writing. It's time to dive deeper into this tale of magic, responsibility, and love. 3,000 years ago, humans were hunted by powerful races with wild magic until a treaty was formed. Now, for centuries, the elves have taken a young woman from Luella's village to be their human queen. To be chosen is seen as a mark of death by the townsfolk. A marked 19-year-old Luella is grateful to have escaped as a girl. Instead, she's dedicated her life to studying herbology and becoming the town's only healer. That is until the Elf King unexpectedly arrives for her. Everything Luella had thought she'd known about her life and herself was a lie. Taken to a land filled with wild magic, Luella is forced to be the new human queen to a cold yet blisteringly handsome Elf King. Once there, she learns about a dying world that only she can save. The magical land of Midscape pulls on one corner of her heart. Her home and the people tug on another. But what will truly break her is a passion she never wanted. My, what is so significant about dear Luella that she has to marry the king of the elves? There is a lot to unpack here, and I have to keep this review spoiler-free. Let's start at the beginning of the story. Things are getting bad in Luella's town. There is supposed to be a young woman for the Elf King to marry, but they can't locate her because she hasn't been found. People in the town are suffering. Several have gotten sick and many have died. Luella, as the town's only healer, is worried about all of this. She's doing her best to help, but it doesn't matter. As long as the Elf King's intended wife, who is known as the Human Queen, has not been found, the suffering will continue and eventually get worse. The town's leaders are tripling down their efforts to find the woman who is supposed to be the Human Queen. Normally, they would have found her by now and trained her in her role as the Human Queen. It's way past the deadline now, and the Elf King, who the town is definitely afraid of, is getting pissed that they haven't found the Human Queen yet. When Luella is starting to make her rounds to see her patient, she runs into her friend Luke, who she has had romantic feelings for many years. He lets her know he has romantic feelings for her as well and wants her to leave town with him. Luella is happy he feels the same way, but but she does not want to leave, despite the fear of the Elf King and the problems happening because the human queen has not been found. As the town's only healer, she feels that it is her responsibility to stay and take care of everyone. Luke starts demanding she leave with him. He also starts pushing the idea of them getting married in what I feel was an extreme way, making Luella start to rethink her feelings for him, especially after Luella made it clear marriage was not something she was ready for. Sometime later, they go to the town square where the Elf King arrives angry that the human queen has not been located. I'm going to talk more about the Elf King later in the review. Shortly after he arrives, he discovers Luella is the human queen and Luke was hiding that information from Luella and the whole town. If you wish to know how he did that, you will have to grab a copy of this story. Luella is furious that this information was hidden from her. People have been getting sick and hurt thanks to there being no human queen, and not finding the human queen was creating bad blood with the elves, who they were not on the best of terms with, but things weren't about to explode. Luella must immediately marry the Elf King in a rushed wedding ceremony. If she doesn't, things will only get worse. Her heart has been broken by Luke. She has to leave everything and everyone she knows to live with the Elf King as his human queen, so her day is pretty much ruined. However, Luella will later learn becoming the human queen is not the worst thing that could happen to her. When Luella first arrives in the kingdom of the elves, a lot of the elves and other mythical creatures do not like her and give her a bit of a rough time. Elves and other mythical beings populate a land known as Midscape that exists in a parallel world separated from the human world by a magical barrier known as the Fade. Midscape, together with everyone who lives there, will die unless the human queen sits on her throne. Her throne drains magic from her body to bring the vegetation in Midscape back to life. This process stops the issues in Luella's hometown as well. Having her magic drain hurts Luella, and Luella's magic is not as potent as past human queens. She may not survive continuing to sit on the throne for very long. The Elf King forces his wife to sit on a magic throne that drains her magic, endangering her life. He must be a real piece of shit. Well, you would be both right and wrong about that. The Elf King's name is Elads, and at first he comes off as a real prick. He's mad at Luella for taking so long to be found. He's mad because members of his kingdom and other kingdoms of Midscape look down on him because it took a while to find the human queen. And he's mad because he had to live in extended isolation while he was waiting for the human queen to be found. The way elf society works is that the current elf king and the next elf king are not supposed to be seen in public at the same time. Additionally, the elf king is supposed to make his appearance after he marries the human queen. With one exception, Elads has never been outside the palace, and growing up he was not allowed much of a social life within the palace. His frustration does cause him and Luella to fight non-stop, making it harder for the both of them to try to meet each other halfway to have a better understanding. Elads grew up with the standard royal treatment, being constantly reminded of his role as the Elf King, always told to live up to his role, otherwise the entire kingdom would die, always act tough, even when he does not have to, because he needs to protect the kingdom, barely see his parents, and all of his interactions with his parents need to be solely focused on how he needs to work harder to be a good elf king. Otherwise, the kingdom will be destroyed. And he has the extra added benefit of constantly being unsure if his parents ever gave a damn about him. In spite of the coldness that he grew up with, the Elf King is not the monster Luella and the rest of the people in her hometown believe him to be. He's actually a very caring individual who lives under a lot of pressure, which causes him not always to act the way he should. If it hadn't been for his stepmother, Elads probably would have been a huge jackass. To help you better understand what I mean by this, let's take a look at how the relationship between the Elf King and the Human Queen is supposed to work. The Elf King and the Human Queen get married so the Human Queen can become the battery to bring everything back to life in Midscape. But the Human Queen is not expected to give birth to the heir. Her role is just to be a battery. The Elf King is expected to have a baby with a lover to keep the throne strong with pure elf blood. The Human Queen is also allowed to have lovers, I guess, to keep her from feeling lonely. Basically, this is a mandatory open marriage, so the previous Human Queen is not Elads' mother. Elads has a complicated relationship with his parents. As heir to the throne, a lot was expected of him, so he did not receive love and attention from his mom and dad, just political pressure. He does have one friend who is a member of the Royal Guard. She tries to help him, but there is only so much she can do, especially when they were kids. The main person who did help him deal with his anxiety and loneliness was his stepmother, aka the previous Human Queen. From the way Elads described his relationship with his stepmother, it appears she was the one who gave him the parental affection he desperately needed. The only time he was allowed to leave the palace was to visit her at her vacation cottage. When Elads later tells Luella about his visits to the vacation cottage and spending time with his stepmother, even though he doesn't say it outright, he does seem to be hinting that his stepmother was the only person he really viewed as his parent via the fact that she was the only one who showed him necessary affection. His relationship with his stepmother also seems to have complicated his relationship with his biological mother. Elads' mother gave birth to him and his brothers, yet she does not command the same respect or influence as the Human Queen. It also looks like the only reason she is allowed to be in the palace at all is because, in spite of her poor relationship with Elads, he is not going to throw his mother out. His mother does seem to have a complex with Human Queens. I suspect this has to do with Elads' father never marrying her in view of the fact that he was married to the Human Queen. In addition, the Elf King can only live a few years after the Human Queen. The Elf King and Human Queen have a connection that you will have to read this story to learn about. This connection means once the Human Queen goes, the Elf King better get his affairs in order, because it's a matter of time before he gets sick and passes away. Elads' mother deeply loved his father, knowing his time was cut short thanks to the death of the previous Human Queen. His mother's hatred of the Human Queen grew, and as the new Human Queen, she takes her frustration out on Luella. Additionally, the previous Human Queen, having a better relationship with her oldest son than she did, seems to bother her. Lastly, Elads' mother, like most elves, see humans as beneath them. and not receiving the same respect as someone that she views as a lesser being, I feel probably pisses her off as well. Eldos's parents showed more affection to their second son, who, as the second son, had an important role to fulfill as well. Thus, he was placed under pressure, just not as extreme as Eldos was. However, Eldos's youngest brother, whose name is Harrow, was spoiled rotten by his parents. As the third son, there was not anything expected of him. So his parents, especially his mother, spoiled Harrow and let him get away with whatever he wanted, making things more complicated with the family dynamic. Eldos has resentment towards Harrow because Harrow was the one who received the most affection from their parents. Combined with that, Harrow is still Eldos's brother, so he's mad at himself for being so mean to his youngest brother. Harrow, on the other hand, feels useless and hates himself because, other than being the king's brother, he does not have a role and nothing is expected of him. He just sits there and is viewed as useless. He's also very spoiled and is allowed to do whatever he wants, so he just deals with his problems by drinking and partying with his friends, which causes a lot of problems, especially for Luella. Why is Eldos's youngest brother giving Luella such a hard time? Well, you're just going to have to read this lovely book to discover that for yourselves, my lovelies. The last part of the story I would like to speak with you about is how Luella is determined to keep fighting for what she wants. Luella's hometown helped her raise enough money to go to school to be a healer. She wants to go home and take care of everybody in her town, not be a battery to recharge Midscape. Luella makes it clear to Eldos that she's not living her life, having the life sucked out of her. And Eldos, who is not that fond of her at the time, is understanding of her frustration. He does not like seeing her have the life drained from her by the throne, but he lets her know they don't really have a say in the matter. Via Midscape will fall to ruin without the human queen, which will lead to war with the human world. Luella, however, is not as powerful as previous human queens. Fulfilling her role will kill her a lot quicker than the other human queens and clearly lead to war because there won't be a human queen around to recharge Midscape. The two of them make a deal. Luella will continue her role as the human queen. Meanwhile, she and Eldos will try to stop fighting and find a way to end the need for a human queen. Sadly, they are on a timer because if they don't find a solution before it's time for Luella's coronation, she will be trapped in the role of human queen forever. After they start the process of trying to figure out how to unbind Luella from the role of human queen, things get a little bit more complicated. Eldos and Luella get more excited about the idea of Luella no longer having to be a battery anymore, but neither of them are that fond of Luella leaving and going back home. Luella leaving no longer is super appealing to them. Gee, I wonder how that happened. Anyway, my lovelies, it is time to rate this story. When it comes to A Deal with the Elf King, I am giving it the rating of 5 butterflies out of 5. This story was a super duper fun read, and I'm telling you right now, my lovelies, if you don't grab yourself a copy, you will really be missing out. Now, if you have made it to this part of the video, thank you so much. And please give this video a like. Leave me a little comment. And if you have not yet, slap the subscribe button like it owes your money. And don't forget to give that little notification bell a ring. And with that, my lovelies, this video is a wrap. Now if you please come with me as we dance into a world of magic.